So we did number 1 yesterday. The answer was 20 and negative 20. So there's 2 solutions and we did the work yesterday. So if you go back, watch that video and look at those notes online, then feel free to. The rest are pretty similar as far as like the process. So is number 2 that easy to like guess and check what n could be? No, it's hard to think, oh, what can I square and then multiply by 3 to get 432. So if it were me doing that one, I would solve it algebraically, meaning isolate the n. I'm rewriting it over here so I have room. Anytime I tell you to isolate a variable, I tell you to start with what is farther. So would that be the 3 or the 2? Actually the 3, and I know that one's hard to tell because both the numbers are like smushed up against it, but the 2 is technically closer because it's like an exponent. If you're ever confused, another way to think about it is when you're solving, you do PEMDAS in reverse. Okay, so then you really know you do the you get rid of the multiplication before you get rid of the exponent. Do it in reverse. So opposite of multiplying by 3 is what are you doing on one side of the equal sign? And what is 432 divided by 3? 144 sounds right. Someone confirm my fingers. Yeah. Okay, great. 144 equals n squared. N is not alone. What's the opposite of squaring something? Getting the square root. Whatever you do on one side. What is the square root of 144? Oh. Not just 12, but so that's why anytime you square root something, get into the habit of putting this symbol. It's a plus sign and a minus sign put together. Do you know what that's called? It's called a plus or minus sign. Okay, so really easy name. It has a plus and a minus put together. So yeah, so that's why technically for that one I have 2 answers. I have 12 and negative 12 for number 2. All right, using that same process. Again, today's a shorter day, plus I have to give you the announcements during the class. So we're going to keep it moving even if you didn't have time to try it. So did anyone get an answer for number 3? I'm just curious. Or Landon? 11. So n equals 11. Do you think there's only one solution? Okay, anyone think that there's another? So let's see. Again, start with what's farther from the n. Would that be the 2 or the 1? The 2. The 2 is physically farther.
Because look, n plus 1 and the 2 is farther away from the n.
Oh, from the n. Yep, from the variable always. Yeah, this one down here. So that's why you get rid of that first. And again, if you're like confused still, PEMDAS in reverse. So you get rid of the exponent before you get rid of the parentheses. So opposite of squaring something is whatever you do on one side of the equal sign. What's the square root of 144? Not just 12, but plus or minus 12. Good job, right? So now on the right side, I have n plus 1, and the parentheses can go away now because there's nothing else on that side. Anyone can? So. All right, now get the n fully alone. What's opposite of adding 1? So whatever you do on one side of the equal sign. And remember, this is a plus or minus 12. So you'll have to do positive 12 minus 1, which is what? And then what's negative 12 minus 1? Yes, it is negative 13. So there's 2 answers. Almost always are there 2 answers, unless you're like square rooting a 0 because there's no positive and negative 0. Then there's almost always 2 answers. Okay, questions there? All right, now number 4 has more stuff in it. But that's okay, because you know that when you solve for a variable, you always start with what is farther. 2. And then what is farther from the end? The 30. Earlier, someone said 70, which is true, that is the farthest, but it's already on the other side of the equal sign. So we only care, like, we want to get the n alone on one side. So the farthest is that 30. How do you make it go away? Whatever you do on one side of the equal sign. Great. So now I have this on the left and on the right with 70 plus 30. Great. Now what's farther, the 5 or the 2? Opposite of squaring is whatever you do on one side. And now I have n minus 5 equals what? Say it right. Anytime you square root something, you get plus or minus 10. In this unit, so there's a reason we're doing this. In this unit, there's gonna almost always be 2 answers. 2 answers, 1 solution, or no solutions. Those are your 3 options, but most of the time it'll be 2. Because of that, when you square root, you get a plus or minus. All right, opposite of minusing 5 is whatever you do on one side of the equal sign. Great. And remember, it's a plus or minus 10. So what's positive 10 plus 5? And negative 10 plus 5. Negative 5 sounds a little more right. Yeah. Okay. So not all the time are the answers necessarily opposites of each other, like in 3 and 4. You had 2 different answers. And each time it's because of that square root. You get a plus or minus. Questions on that? All right, so that concludes the 7.3. We're gonna look at the 7.4 paper that I passed out. If you didn't get it, it's over in the usual spot now. All right, so the part on 7.4 that we are going to do is. Oh, I'm on this completely wrong. Sorry. Is this one. So I won't give you any guidance, but as you remember, there's lots of ways you could use to solve for the x. We're debating on whether or not we're gonna let you use Desmos, like the graphing part at least, because I don't know, because then it kind of defeats the purpose of solving. So just kind of keep that in mind. You don't always have Desmos. Like you will not have Desmos tomorrow. The math test. Bring your own calculator, or check one out from the bookstore. So you have guess and check. You have solving algebraically. You could graph, but don't graph. And all this other sorts of ways. The only guidance I'll give you, because it says take the zero product property out for a spin. The only guidance I'll give you is reminding you what the zero product property is. We talked about it yesterday. So what is it? The zero product property. So notice, what are all of these equal to? 0. So yesterday we talked about if we multiply some stuff together and it equals 0.
Oh, it has to be a 0 in it.
One of the numbers being multiplied must be 0. That's the only thing I'll remind you of before letting you do this part. These first 3, you shouldn't need the zero product property at all. But these last ones might be easiest knowing that property. Right, and that's all I'm going to tell you. So I'll give you like 5 minutes or so. Wait. Number 1, what does x equal? All at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Number 1. Okay, great. What method did you use to solve that? Okay, probably guess and check. If you did the math, you would think, oh, what can I do to get the x alone? Add the 3 on each side. And then yes, x equals 3. It's alone now. Number 2, What does X equal?
-11.
Okay, great. You probably didn't need to do the math for that one, but if you did, we didn't. You would think, what can I do to get the X alone? -11 would, whatever you on one side. Okay, great. This one's a two-stepper. You have to know what's farther, the 2 or the 11.
The 11.
And then how do you get rid of it?
Subtract.
Everything on one side, easier to the other. And then 2x equals -11, because it was 0 minus 11. Opposite of multiplying by 2 is everything on one side. What does x equal? -5.5. And since that's a decimal that ends, we'll just leave it as a decimal. If it was a repeating decimal that goes on forever, I would just put the fraction. All right, now you might have done a little unnecessary work on 4 through 7. Did anyone like distribute or like FOIL these out and then try isolating?
No.
Okay, if you did, you might have seen that you ran into some issues because you couldn't like fully isolate like when it's x and x squared. So that's why the zero product property is really helpful. So knowing that if I have two factors that multiply to 0, so I'll rewrite this one. Then what must be true?
0.
One of them must be 0. Like this could be 0, the x, so set each factor equal to 0.
Good.
Or this parentheses could equal 0. So this one's easy, the x is already alone there, so I know one of my answers will be 0. Over here, when you solve this, and doesn't this one look familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, we just did it. X equals -5.5. So you should have had 2 answers for that one. All right, should have had 2 answers for that one because either one of them could be 0. You don't know which one for sure, but if I plug in for those values into the x, then they both give me an answer of 0. Does that make sense? So that can save you some time by remembering your zero product property. Now, number 5, you might have had to do the algebra or you might not have had to. But for the zero product property, if they multiply to give me 0, and I would show this work like how I'm showing you. Because one of the methods we're going to use to solve quadratics is going to be by factoring. And then since your solutions are your zeros, your x-intercepts, whatever you want to call them, you would set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So for number 5, what's one of my answers?
0.
3
Oh.
and
-11.
because these numbers make either one or both of the parentheses 0. This answer makes this parentheses 0, this answer makes that one 0. Either one works. So for number 5, it should be x equals 3 and -11. That would-
Yeah.
All right. Same concept with this one. If we're solving for the zeros, we're going to set it equal to 0. In other words, my x-intercept. And then whatever number I can plug into the x to get 0 for that parentheses is going to be one of my solutions. And almost always for the quadratics are there 2 solutions. These first 3 problems are not quadratics because they don't have an x squared. So that's why there's only 1. But the rest can get an x squared. So what's one of my answers for number 6? 3, because I plug in it into that one. Get 3.
Yeah.
This one we've done a few times.
5.5. -5.
So those are my 2 answers for number 6. Am I confusing anyone? Good. Last one, how many answers do you think there's gonna be?
3.
3,
Number 6.
because there's 3 different factors. Sorry, I just want to show you this real quick because the bell's gonna ring any second. All right, but set each factor equal to 0. And then solve for each one individually for the x. Question, Brian? Yay.
Right there, you know, red. The left side. Right.
Fine, this one's not good. This one over here. Okay, anyway, one of my answers is 0. One of my answers is 50. And the last one. 3 answers is number 7.